I didn't know that morning would change the way my children looked at me. It started like any other quiet weekday. The house was still, the kind of still that only happens after you've raised kids long enough to know when they're avoiding you. I stood at the kitchen sink with a chipped mug, warming my hands, staring at the backyard I hadn't stepped into in months. The grass was too tall again. I made a note to myself to cut it later, even though I knew my knees would complain. Behind me, I heard footsteps, fast, heavy, no greeting. "Did you move my papers?" My son asked. No. "Hello." "No, good morning." I turned slowly, already feeling that familiar knot in my chest. "Which papers?" "The ones on the table." "Don't act like you don't know," he said, already frustrated. "I wiped the table last night," I said. "I stacked them neatly." He scoffed, like I had insulted him. "You always touch things you shouldn't." I wanted to say something, anything, but I didn't. I just nodded and went back to the sink. That was how it was now. Short words, sharp looks, like I was a problem they had to work around. A few minutes later, my daughter came in, phone pressed to her ear. She didn't look at me either. "I can't talk now," she said into the phone. "I'm at my mother's place." She paused listening, then rolled her eyes. "Yes, I know. I'll be out soon." My mother's place, not home, not our house, just my place. She hung up and finally glanced at me, like she had just remembered I existed. "Do you have any cash?" "For what?" I asked. "Never mind," she said quickly. "I'll figure it out." She opened the fridge, frowned at the food inside, and shut it harder than necessary. "You really should shop better," she muttered. "There's nothing here." I watched her walk away, my chest tight, my mouth dry. I wanted to remind her that she hadn't paid for groceries in years, that I bought what I could, that I tried, but the words stayed stuck. By noon, both of them were gone. The house felt larger without them, but not lighter. I sat at the small dining table, the one with the uneven leg, and stared at the envelope in front of me. It had arrived the day before, plain, thick, no return address on the front. My name typed neatly in the center. I hadn't opened it yet. I don't know why. Maybe I was scared. Maybe I already knew, deep down, that whatever was inside would bring trouble. The envelope felt heavy when I picked it up. Not physically, emotionally, like it carried weight from another life. I had lived quietly, carefully, without telling anyone. I slid my finger under the seal and pulled the flap open. Inside were documents. Official ones, clean, precise, the kind people trust without question. I didn't read them right away. I just stared at the top page. My name printed in bold letters. My full name, the one I rarely heard anymore. My hands started to shake. I sat there for a long time, breathing slowly, reading line after line, making sure it was real, making sure I wasn't misunderstanding. When I finished, I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes. So this was it. This was the thing I had kept quiet all these years. The thing I never planned to use. The thing my children never bothered to ask about. I folded the papers carefully and slid them back into the envelope. I placed it in the drawer beside me, under old bills and instruction manuals. I told myself to stay calm, but calm left me when my phone rang. It was my son. "What did you do?" He snapped, not even waiting for me to speak. "What do you mean?" I asked. "The bank called me," he said. "They said something about an account in your name." "Why would they call me?" I stood up slowly, my heart pounding. "I didn't give them your number." "Well, they have it," he said. "And they're asking questions." "What is going on?" I looked at the drawer where the envelope sat, quiet and patient. "It's nothing you need to worry about," I said. That was the wrong thing to say. He laughed, sharp and bitter. "Nothing? They don't call me about nothing. You've been hiding things again, haven't you?" I swallowed. "I haven't been hiding. I just didn't think it mattered." "Didn't think it mattered?" His voice rose. "You live in my house. You use my car sometimes. And you don't think your finances matter?" I felt something break. Then, a small crack but deep. "This was my house first," I said quietly. There was a pause. Just a second. Then he said, "Don't start." He hung up. I stood there, phone still in my hand, staring at the wall. My reflection in the glass cabinet looked tired, smaller than I remembered. An hour later, the door opened hard enough to shake the frame. My daughter walked in first. My son followed, jaw tight, eyes cold. They didn't sit. They didn't take off their shoes. "What is this?" my daughter asked, holding her phone out toward me. "Why is a lawyer emailing me about you?" I blinked. "A lawyer?" Yes, she said. And don't act surprised. We're tired of this. Tired of what? I asked. Of you being vague, my son said. Of things coming out of nowhere. Of cleaning up messes we didn't make. I felt my throat tighten. I never asked you to clean anything up. You ask by existing like this, my daughter snapped. By needing help all the time. That one hurt more than the rest. I don't need help all the time, I said softly. They looked at each other. The kind of look people share when they've already decided something. Open the drawer, my son said. What drawer? The one by the table, he said. The one you just glanced at. My hand trembled. This is not your business, I said. It became our business when people started calling us, my daughter said. Open it. I stood there, caught between anger and fear, between wanting to protect something and being too tired to fight. Slowly, I walked to the drawer and pulled it open. I took out the envelope. Both of them leaned forward slightly, eyes fixed on my hands. What is that? My son asked. I didn't answer. I took out the papers and placed them on the table. My daughter picked up the first page. Her face changed as she read. What is this? She asked again, but quieter. My son grabbed the next page. His eyes moved fast, then slower. His mouth opened slightly. This can't be right, he said. I sat down. It's right, I said. They flipped through the pages, disbelief turning into something else. Something heavier. You never told us, my daughter whispered. I didn't think it would matter, I said again. I didn't think you'd care. My son looked at me, really looked at me, like he was seeing me for the first time in years. You let us think you were broke, he said. I let you think nothing, I replied. You never asked. Silence filled the room, the kind of silence that presses on your ears. My daughter slowly sat down too, papers still in her hands. Do you know how this makes us look? She asked. I almost laughed. Almost. How it makes you look, I said. Is that what you're worried about? You let us treat you like, she stopped herself, like trash? I finished for her. Neither of them denied it. I stood up, my legs unsteady, but my voice calm. I didn't keep this secret to hurt you, I said. I kept it because I wanted to live quietly. Because I wanted to know who loved me without conditions. My son's face hardened. That's manipulative. No, I said. What you did was. They stared at me, shocked. I listened. I continued. Every comment, every sigh, every time you talked about me like I was a burden. And I stayed silent, my daughter's eyes filled with tears, but I didn't move to comfort her. You made me small, I said. And you never wondered why I let you. The room felt different now. Like something had shifted under our feet. This changes things, my son said finally. I nodded. I know. They didn't apologize. Not yet. But for the first time in a long while. They didn't look at me like I was nothing. They looked like they were afraid of what they had done. And that was only the beginning. When I look back now, I can see how it didn't start with shouting or insults. It started quietly. So quietly that I didn't even notice when the balance shifted. After their father died, everything changed shape. Not all at once, slowly, like a room rearranged, one piece at a time, until you wake up one day and can't remember where anything used to be. Back then, the house was still loud. Doors slammed for different reasons. Laughter mixed with grief. We were all learning how to live without the man who used to fill the silence. I became the strong one because someone had to. I handled the paperwork, the phone calls, the polite condolences from people who went back to their lives after a few weeks. I kept my voice steady when the kids cried at night. I cooked. I cleaned. I showed up. I didn't fall apart in front of them. I didn't let them see how scared I was. Maybe that was my first mistake. In those early years, they still needed me. They asked questions. They sat at the table and talked about their days. They leaned into me without thinking. I paid off debts quietly. I sold things they didn't notice were gone. Jewelry, old furniture, a painting I loved, but never mentioned again. I told myself it was fine. They were young. They needed stability more than honesty about money. When my son wanted to change schools, I made it happen. When my daughter wanted lessons, I nodded and found a way. I worked longer hours. I said no to myself so many times that it stopped feeling like a choice. I never once told them how tired I was. Years passed like that. They grew. I aged. They learned confidence. I learned how to move quietly through my own home. Somewhere along the way, my role shifted. I was no longer the center. I became the background. When my son got his first job, he stopped asking if I needed anything from the store. When my daughter started dating seriously, she stopped telling me where she was going. Small things, normal things, I told myself, but then came the comments. Why is the house so cold? Do you really need to watch that right now? You should think about downsizing. They said these things casually, like suggestions, like advice. I took them as love. When my knees started hurting more often, I didn't complain. I wrapped them tighter. When my hands shook from exhaustion, I hid them in my pockets. I had savings then, quiet savings, the kind you build slowly, carefully, without telling anyone. Because you've learned the world changes when people know. That money came from a life before them, from choices I made long ago, from work I did when no one was watching. I never thought of it as something to reveal. It was simply there, a safety net I hoped I'd never need. When my son suggested we combine resources to make things easier, I hesitated. Not because I didn't trust him, but because I knew how power works once money is shared. Still, I agreed to small things, shared bills, shared accounts for groceries, nothing big. I didn't realize how quickly that would turn into expectations. If I questioned a purchase, I was being difficult. If I said I didn't need something, I was being stubborn. If I stayed quiet, I was moody. There was no right way to exist. My daughter moved back in after her breakup. Temporary, she said. Just until she got back on her feet. I gave her my room because it was bigger. I moved into the smaller one without comment. I told myself it was temporary too. She left her clothes everywhere, used my things without asking, borrowed money and forgot to return it. When I mentioned it gently, she sighed like I was exhausting. You always make things awkward, she said once. That sentence stayed with me. I stopped mentioning things. I learned how to disappear in plain sight. Mornings became quiet rituals. I woke before everyone else, made tea, sat alone. I listened to the house breathe. Sometimes I imagined what it would be like to leave, not dramatically, just quietly, a small apartment, my own space. But then I thought of them, of how they'd struggle, of how guilty I'd feel. So I stayed. The money stayed in touch. It became my secret anchor. The one thing that was still mine. As years went on, they began to talk about me like I wasn't there. She doesn't really understand how things work now. She's old-fashioned. She wouldn't cope on her own. They said these things in the kitchen while I washed dishes, in the living room while I folded laundry. I told myself they didn't mean harm, that this was just how generations talk. But each word chipped away at something inside me. I noticed how they spoke to me only when they needed something, a ride, a signature, a favor. When I tried to share something about my day, they checked their phones. I started speaking less. I watched them closely. The way they moved through the house with confidence. The way they made decisions without consulting me. It hurt. But it also taught me something. They saw me as weak because I let them, not because I was. The day my son said, "You wouldn't survive without us," I smiled. He thought it was reassurance. I knew it was a warning. That night, I went through my old documents. Slowly, carefully. I reminded myself who I was before motherhood became my only identity. I remembered the years of discipline, the sacrifices, the nights I stayed awake, planning for a future no one else believed in. I realized then that my silence had become a kind of permission. So I stayed silent longer, not out of fear, out of observation. I wanted to see how far it would go. I wanted to know the truth. And they gave it to me, one careless comment at a time. By the time I realized how much control they thought they had, it was already normal to them. Control doesn't always look like rules or shouting. Sometimes it looks like deciding what time you eat, what shows you watch, when you speak, when you should stay quiet. They didn't sit me down and say, "This is how it will be." They didn't have to. It was in the way my son sighed if I asked a question while he was working on his laptop. It was in the way my daughter corrected me in front of others, laughing, like it was harmless. No, Mom, that's not how it works anymore. I started checking their moods before speaking. If my son's jaw was tight, I waited. If my daughter was scrolling fast on her phone, I waited. Waiting became my main skill. I told myself this was peace, but peace built on silence is fragile. They began making decisions for me without asking. My son changed the internet plan because I didn't need the faster one anyway. My daughter canceled a doctor appointment I had scheduled because it wasn't urgent. When I questioned it, they looked confused. "We're helping you," my daughter said. "You forget things." I didn't forget. I remembered everything. I just didn't argue anymore. They talked about selling the house one evening while I was in the room. "If we sell, We can get something smaller, my son said. Less work for everyone. Yeah, my daughter added. She doesn't even use most of the space. They both looked at me then, like they expected agreement. I felt my heart beat hard in my chest. This house is my home, I said. My son leaned back in his chair. You're being emotional. That word again. Emotional? Like it explained everything. Like it erased my right to feel. I'm being honest, I said. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Same thing. After that, they stopped including me in conversations about the future. They spoke in half sentences, code words. When the time comes, we'll deal with it later. She won't mind. I heard my life being planned like a schedule I wasn't invited to see. The pressure wasn't loud. It was steady. If I cooked something they didn't like, it went untouched. If I bought something small for myself, like a new sweater, there were comments. Do you really need that? Shouldn't you save? I wanted to ask. Save for what? For who? But I stayed quiet. Inside me, something started to harden. Not anger, awareness. I began to notice how quickly their tone changed when money came up. How interested they suddenly were in bills, accounts, paperwork. My daughter asked one afternoon, how much do you have saved anyway? I looked at her. Why? She shrugged. Just thinking ahead. I smiled gently. Enough. That answer bothered them. After that, questions became sharper. Did Dad leave you anything we don't know about? Are there accounts we should be aware of? You should really be transparent with us. Transparent. As if I owed them access to every part of me. I felt the old instinct rise up. The one that wanted to please, to smooth things over. But I didn't give in. Instead, I started pulling back in small ways. I stopped explaining myself. I stopped asking permission. I stopped filling the silence that made them uncomfortable. My son accused me of being distant. My daughter asked if I was upset about something. I told them the truth. I'm just tired. They accepted that answer because it fit their image of me. But behind that tiredness was clarity. I saw how they leaned on the idea that I needed them, how it made them feel important, secure. They liked the power imbalance, and they liked it even more because I never challenged it, until the day the bank letter arrived. Before that there were signs, a notice missing from the mail pile, a voicemail I hadn't heard but they somehow knew about, questions that felt rehearsed. I realized then they had been watching me too, not with care, with calculation. They assumed that whatever I had would eventually be theirs. That time alone would hand it to them. They treated my patience like weakness, my kindness like permission. And still, I didn't confront them, because confrontation isn't always the strongest move. Sometimes the strongest move is letting people reveal exactly who they are. The morning the calls started coming in, I felt something close to calm. Not relief, not fear, acceptance. They were angry, not because I had done something wrong, but because the version of me they relied on was slipping away. The one who stayed quiet. The one who didn't challenge. The one who existed only in relation to them. When they stood in front of me that day, demanding answers, I saw it clearly. They weren't hurt, they were threatened. And for the first time in years, the power in the room wasn't entirely theirs. They didn't leave after that first confrontation. They stayed in the house like a storm that didn't know where to go. Too heavy to move on, too charged to disappear. For the rest of that day, they hovered, whispered in the hallway, made phone calls they stepped outside to take. Every time I entered a room, the conversation stopped. I didn't ask what they were saying. I didn't need to. That night, I slept better than I had in years, not because things were resolved, but because they were finally exposed. The next morning, I woke up early again. Habit. I made tea and sat at the table. My hands were steady this time. When my daughter came in, she paused when she saw me, really paused, like she wasn't sure what version of me she was about to deal with. Morning, she said carefully. Morning, I replied. She opened her mouth, closed it, then finally sat down across from me. I didn't sleep, she said. I did, I answered. That surprised her. She studied my face. You don't seem worried. I'm not, I said. That bothered her more than anger would have. My son came in a few minutes later. He didn't sit. He leaned against the counter, arms crossed. We need to talk, he said. I nodded. We already are. He exhaled through his nose. You know what I mean. I gestured to the chair. Then sit. He hesitated, then did. For a moment, none of us spoke. The kettle clicked as it cooled. Finally, my son said, "Why didn't you tell us?" I looked at him, not with accusation, with honesty. Because every time I tried to talk about something that mattered to me, I said, "You told me I was overthinking, or being emotional, or living in the past." My daughter swallowed. "That's not fair," she said. "It's accurate," I replied. She opened her mouth to argue, then stopped. Her eyes dropped to the table. I continued, my voice calm. "I didn't hide this to trick you. I hid it because I wanted peace. And because I wanted to see who you were when you thought I had nothing to give you." My son leaned forward. "That's not let me finish," I said. He froze. I had never interrupted him before. "I watched you," I said. "I listened. I learned." Neither of them spoke. "I learned that when you thought I was dependent, you were impatient, dismissive, sometimes cruel." My daughter's eyes filled. "We weren't cruel." I met her gaze. "You were careless with me." "That's worse." Silence again. Then my son said quietly, "So what is it exactly?" I reached for the drawer and took out the envelope again. This time, my hands didn't shake. I slid the papers across the table. "Read," I said. They did. Slowly, carefully. This time, not in disbelief, but in calculation. "How long?" my daughter asked. "A long time," I said. "How much?" my son asked. I looked at him. "Enough that I don't have to live the way I've been living." That landed hard. "You let us think," he started. "I let you assume," I corrected. My daughter rubbed her temples. "This is a lot to process." "I processed it alone for years," I said. My son straightened. "You understand this affects us too?" I nodded. "Yes, it affects how you treat me." "That's not what I meant," he said. "I know," I replied. He frowned. "Then what did you mean?" I took a breath. "I mean that the way you speak to me ends now." They both looked at me sharply. "No more decisions made without me," I continued. "No more talking about my life like I'm not in the room. No more acting like I owe you obedience because you think I need you." My daughter whispered, "You're changing." I nodded. "I already changed. You're just noticing now." The shift in the room was real, uncomfortable, like furniture being moved after years of staying in the same place. My son leaned back. "So what happens now?" "That depends on you," I said. He laughed once, short and humorless. "You're serious." "I've never been more serious." They didn't argue. Not then. But later that day, the proof came. A knock at the door. Firm, professional. A woman stood outside with a folder and a polite smile. "Mrs. Harris?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "I'm from the firm handling your account review," she said. "May we come in?" My children froze behind me. Inside, the woman explained things calmly, clearly. She spoke to me, not around me. Asked questions. Confirmed details. I answered easily. My children sat in silence listening. When the woman left, the house felt smaller. "You hired a firm?" my daughter asked. "I already had one," I said. "I just never needed them to step in before." My son stood up slowly. "You were serious about independence." "I always was," I said. "You just didn't believe me." That evening, my daughter cried. Real tears. Not for herself. For the first time, for me. "I didn't realize," she said. "I thought you were just there." I nodded. "I know. I'm sorry." She whispered. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic, but it was real. My son took longer. Days passed. The house changed again. They asked before making plans. They included me in conversations. They watched their tone, not perfectly, but intentionally. One afternoon, my son knocked on my door. "Can we talk?" he asked. I nodded. He sat, hands clasped. "I didn't like who I was becoming," he said. "When I thought you needed me." I didn't respond. It felt powerful, he admitted. "And that scares me." I looked at him then. Really looked. "Power without respect always rots," I said. He nodded. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said. "But I want to do better." I took a breath. "Then start by remembering I'm your mother. Not your responsibility. Not your burden." He nodded again. "I will." That night, I packed a small bag, not to leave forever, just to remind them and myself that I could. When I told them I'd be gone for a few days, they didn't argue. They asked where I was going, if I needed anything. I smiled. "I'll be fine," and I meant it, because the truth was no longer hidden, and neither was I. I didn't tell them where I was staying, not because I wanted to punish them, but because for the first time in a long while, my life didn't need to be explained. I went somewhere quiet. A small place with clean sheets and windows that open easily. No one knew my name there. No one needed anything from me. The first night, I sat on the edge of the bed and listened to the silence. It felt different from the silence at home. This one didn't press on me. It didn't judge. It simply existed. I slept deeply. In the days that followed, I moved slowly. I drank tea when I wanted. I walked when my knees allowed it. I ate simple meals and didn't apologize for them. I thought about my children, of course. You don't stop being a parent just because you step away for a moment. But I thought about myself too. About the woman I had been before. Everything narrowed down to sacrifice and patience and quiet endurance. I realized something important in that space. I didn't want revenge. I didn't want apologies every day. I didn't want them to fear me or flatter me. I wanted respect that didn't depend on money. When I came back, the house felt different again, not tense, not heavy, careful. My son met me at the door. He took my bag without asking, not because he thought I couldn't carry it, but because it was kind. My daughter had cleaned the kitchen, not perfectly, but intentionally. "Welcome back," she said. "Thank you," I replied. And no one rushed me with questions. No one hovered. That alone told me things had shifted. Over the next weeks, the change settled in quietly. They started knocking on my door. They waited for answers instead of assuming. They included me without making a show of it. Sometimes they slipped. Old habits die slowly, but when I spoke, they listened. And when I stayed silent, it wasn't because I was afraid. It was because I chose to be. I set boundaries calmly. No speeches, no threats. I'm not comfortable with that. I'd like to be included in that decision. That doesn't work for me, at first. Those sentences felt strange in my mouth, then they felt natural. The money was never discussed again the way it had been before. Not as leverage, not as expectation. We spoke instead about dinners, about work, about small memories that had been buried under years of tension. One evening, my daughter sat beside me on the couch. "I used to think you were weak," she said quietly. I didn't react. "I see now that you were just steady," she continued. "And we took advantage of that." I nodded. "Steadiness is often mistaken for weakness." She leaned her head on my shoulder. "I won't do that again." "I know," I said. My son showed his change differently. He became more careful with his words, more thoughtful. He asked questions. He used to answer for me. One afternoon he said, "What do you want to do with the house?" Not "what should we do?" Not "what makes sense." "What do you want?" I looked around the room that held so many versions of me. "I'm not sure yet," I said. "And that's okay." He smiled. "It is." There was no dramatic justice, no raised voices, no grand moment where everything snapped into place, just consistency, day after day of being treated like a person again. And something else happened too. I stopped shrinking. I stood straighter. I spoke more freely. I laughed without checking the room first. They noticed. People always do when you stop making yourself small for them. One day, a neighbor asked my daughter, "Your mom seems different." My daughter smiled. She remembered who she is. That was enough. I didn't move out right away. I didn't need to. The power was no longer about where I lived or what I had. It was about choice. And that was mine again. Sometimes, late at night, I think about how close I came to disappearing completely into a role they had written for me. And I'm grateful I waited. Not because patience fixed everything, but because silence, when used carefully, revealed the truth. My children don't treat me like trash anymore. Not because of a secret, but because they finally learned what they almost lost. And I learned that dignity doesn't need to be loud to be unbreakable.